Regresó del trabajo, cansado y con la ropa sucia, a la puerta de su casa. Pero la policía ya lo estaba esperando. Lo obligaron a arrodillarse, sin saber quién era. A los pocos días regresó y les cerró el acceso para siempre. Suscríbete y escribe en los comentarios desde qué ciudad nos ves. The sun was already slipping behind the roof lines by the time Linway turned onto the familiar stretch of road leading into Silver Oaks, the gated community he and his family had called home for the past 6 years. His dark gray Ford F-150 rumbled softly beneath him, its tires humming against the asphalt that had started to cool after a long, hot day. The truck smelled faintly of sawdust, sweat, and sun-baked concrete. His boots, resting heavily on the floor mats, were caked with reddish dirt, remnants of the housing lot he had overseen from dawn until almost dusk. His hands, though washed in a basin at the site, still held the scent of cedar and steel. The ache in his shoulders was matched only by the numb rhythm of fatigue behind his eyes. All he could think about was the promise of home, a hot shower, clean clothes, and the warm soy-scented chicken his wife Malin said she'd have waiting. As he crested the final bend before the entrance to his street, his brow furrowed. 2 police cruisers were parked in front of the gate to his driveway, angled in a way that blocked access entirely. The red and blue lights weren't flashing, and the headlights were off, but both engines were clearly running, sending subtle heat waves into the air. Lynn eased his foot off the accelerator and slowly brought the truck to a stop about 10 feet away. At first, he thought maybe it was something unrelated, a problem with a neighbor or some sort of community issue. But as he scanned the scene, his name etched neatly into the bronze plaque beside the gate, a sinking chill settled into his chest. This wasn't about someone else. One of the officers, a younger man in his 20s with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward and lifted a hand. Lynn rolled his window down, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. "Evening," he said calmly, though confusion tugged at the edge of his voice. "Is there a problem?" The officer didn't answer the question. Instead, he narrowed his eyes behind the lenses and gestured toward the gate. "We need you to stay in the vehicle." Lynn didn't move. He looked past the officer toward the house, which sat beyond the gate like a silent witness, the porch lights just starting to glow in the twilight. "That's my home," he said, voice still level. "I live here." The second officer emerged from behind the cruiser. This one was older, maybe mid-40s, with a broader build and a face hardened by habit. He rested his hand casually near the butt of his holstered weapon as he approached, saying nothing at first. The younger one took a step closer to Lynn's window. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this address," he said, scanning Lynn's truck and then Lynn himself. "Do you have identification?" Lynn reached slowly into the breast pocket of his work shirt and withdrew his license. "Of course," he said, extending it out the window. The older officer took it without a word and studied it. His eyes lingered on the address. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Step out of the vehicle." A slight pause settled in the air. Lynn blinked. "Excuse me?" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated. "We need to verify your identity and ensure there is no immediate threat." Lynn hesitated, but his instincts, honed over decades of quiet endurance, told him not to argue. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. His knees ached slightly from the long day, but he stood tall. His hands remained at his sides, open and empty. The older officer moved quickly, circling behind Lynn. The younger one kept a firm stance, eyes fixed. "Face the truck," he ordered. Lynn complied, trying to keep his breathing even. He could feel the tension rising. He could feel the judgment. The smell of gasoline and newly cut grass mingled with the growing weight of humiliation. The words that came next landed like a slap. "On your knees." For a moment, Lynn thought he misheard. He turned his head slightly. "Sir?" he said quietly. "On your knees," the officer repeated, this time louder. "Now." A few seconds passed, and Lynn realized that no reason would stop this. No license, no address, no explanation of his profession, of the house he had designed and poured his soul into. None of that mattered here. Not in this moment. Not to these men. Slowly, carefully, he knelt. The gravel bit through his jeans and into his knees. The cool air brushed his neck. His hands hovered slightly off the ground. unsure where they were supposed to be. One of the officers moved behind him, still watching. No one said a word. The front door to the house opened with a creak. "Lynn!" Mylène's voice cut through the evening air, tight and high with alarm. She stepped onto the porch in her house slippers, still wearing the soft blue blouse she often changed into after work. "What is going on?" Their daughter Xiaoling appeared behind her, barefoot and holding her phone. Her eyes grew wide at the sight of her father on his knees. Without hesitation, she lifted the phone and began recording. "He lives here," Malin shouted, rushing forward. "He's my husband. This is our home." The officers turned, surprised. The younger one looked suddenly unsure. The older one lowered his hand from his belt. "Ma'am, please stay back," one of them said. "You stay back," Malin fired back. "Get off my property." Xiaoling's phone caught everything. Her father kneeling, his eyes fixed on the dirt, his name glinting from the plaque on the gate behind him. The officers retreating slowly once they realized their error. One handed back the license without apology. The other didn't even meet Lynn's eyes as they returned to their vehicles and drove away without explanation. The gate slid open slowly, almost mockingly, and Lynn climbed back into the truck in silence. Mylène stood beside the vehicle, her hands shaking. Xiaoling stood at the edge of the lawn, still recording, her breath shallow. No one said anything. Inside, Lynn removed his boots at the door and walked straight past the steaming pot of soy chicken on the stove. He sat on the ottoman by the window, staring at his calloused hands. His knees throbbed, not just from the gravel, but from the memory of the moment they touched the earth in submission. A submission demanded without cause, without context, without thought. Xiaoling entered the room and showed him the video. "I filmed everything," she said softly. He looked at the screen. There he was, still, silent, on his knees before a house that bore his name. "We'll talk in the morning," he said. That night, Lynn lay awake next to Mylène, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the ceiling fan above barely masked the ringing in his ears. His wife turned in her sleep, a hand brushing his arm. He didn't move. His thoughts spiraled, dragging him deeper into a feeling he hadn't felt since he first arrived in this country decades ago. Displacement. He thought about what had happened, not just as an isolated event, but as a sign, a reminder, that no matter how many homes he built, how many clients he satisfied, how many permits bore his company's seal, there would still be someone who saw him and assumed he didn't belong. That was the part that stuck. That he could do everything right, be respectful, calm, lawful, and still be forced to kneel on his own driveway like an intruder, as if his labor ended at the curb and the rest belonged to someone else, as if his skin, his clothes, his fatigue erased his name. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come, because something inside him, something old, something heavy, had shifted. And though he didn't yet know how, Lin Wei understood one thing clearly. This wasn't over. Not yet. By the time the first rays of morning light slipped through the slats of the blinds, Lin Wei had already been awake for hours. He hadn't needed an alarm. Sleep had evaded him entirely, lingering only at the outer edge of consciousness, like a stranger who refused to come inside. He had spent most of the night lying on his back, eyes fixed on the whir of the ceiling fan above. His wife, Mylène, had stirred once or twice beside him, murmuring his name in sleep-thickened concern. But Lin hadn't answered. There were no words that could smooth the edge of what had happened, no comfort in whispers or soft touches. At 6:30, he stood alone in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, the familiar hum of the refrigerator grounding him in a reality that now felt altered. On the wall across from him, the security monitor cycled through its feeds in silence. He replayed the footage from the night before, this time with the volume turned up. The video was clear. There was no shouting, no aggressive movements, no cause for alarm, at least not from him. Only the two officers' clipped commands, the absurd escalation, and his own quiet compliance. He watched the moment his knees met the gravel again and again. Mylène entered the kitchen with her hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a worn hoodie and sweatpants. She moved around the kitchen in practiced motions, pulling eggs from the fridge, cracking them into a bowl with care, each sound sharp in the otherwise still house. She didn't speak at first. Lin didn't expect her to. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked without looking at him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the steam curling from his coffee and then over at the monitor. "I'm calling the patrol company," he said after a beat, "as soon as they open." "They're the ones who made the call?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "That's what the officer said. Someone from their team saw me and decided I didn't belong." Milene continued whisking the eggs, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders that hadn't been there the day before. Their daughter, Xiaoling, padded into the room a moment later, already dressed for school. She grabbed a granola bar from the counter and sat silently on one of the bar stools, watching her father closely. "You gonna post the video?" she asked, almost casually. Lin met her eyes, then looked away. "Not yet." She didn't press him. At precisely 8:02 a.m., Lin made the call. The number for Bayside Community Patrol was saved in his phone, a contact he had never expected to use for anything beyond noise complaints or lost packages. The receptionist answered in a chipper tone that struck him as grotesquely out of place. "This is Lin Wei from Silver Oaks," he said without preamble. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of dispatch." After a brief hold filled with generic instrumental music, another voice came on the line. It was deeper, professional. "Mr. Wei, this is Ben Lunsford, head of operations. I understand there was an incident last night. I was actually just about to call you." "You had 2 officers block my driveway and put me on my knees," Lin said flatly. "You want to explain how that happens without so much as verifying anything?" There was a pause. "We received a call from one of our team members who said they spotted suspicious activity near your gate. A male subject, unknown to them, loitering." "You mean me, the homeowner?" "I understand that now, yes. Our patrol officer did not recognize you and, regrettably, acted based on what he believed to be protocol. He didn't check the cameras. He didn't check the records. He saw a Chinese man in work clothes and decided I was a threat." "I assure you," Lunsford said quickly, "we're reviewing our procedures. This is not how we want our relationship with the community to be represented." "There is no relationship," Lin said, voice colder now. "Not anymore." "Are you saying you're terminating?" "I'm not saying it," Lin cut in. "I'm doing it. As of now." He hung up before Lunsford could respond. From the kitchen table, Malin glanced up from her half-eaten eggs. Lin nodded. "That's done. I'll be calling the HOA next." He stepped into his home office and pulled out the HOA agreement from a file drawer. It took only 2 phone calls to reach a board member named Greg Whitmore, a man Lin had seen at several neighborhood barbecues and meetings, but never once spoken to beyond polite greetings. Greg seemed more concerned with public optics than with Lin's personal safety. He offered vague acknowledgments, never once uttering the word apology. Lin terminated his support for the patrol contract on the spot. By noon, the ripple effects had already begun. Malene received a text from a friend. "Saw what happened? That was you?" A co-worker of Lin's sent a message. "Brother, that video is making rounds. You handled that better than I would have." Lin turned to Xiaoling, who was sitting on the living room floor scrolling through her phone. "Did you post the video?" She looked up, shaking her head. "No, but I sent it to Nia." "Your friend Nia? She's got like 12,000 followers on TikTok," Xiaoling said, not quite meeting his gaze. Lin exhaled through his nose. "Well, damn." He wasn't angry, not really. Part of him was relieved. The other part was deeply, profoundly unsettled. Because now it wasn't just a moment that happened in isolation, it was a story, one that others would interpret, share, distort, debate. He had lost control of the narrative. He thought maybe it would blow over quietly, but a knock at the door that evening proved otherwise. 3 firm knocks echoed through the entryway. Lin rose from the couch and looked toward the door, eyebrows knitting. Milan shook her head when he glanced at her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Xiaoling peeked around the corner, eyes wide. Lin opened the door slowly. A woman in her late 60s stood on the porch, holding a plastic container wrapped in foil. Her gray hair was pinned in a neat bun, and she wore a pale blue dress with a cream cardigan. Her eyes were tired but direct. "Mr. Wei," she said, voice shaking just slightly. "May I speak with you for a moment?" He recognized her face. Margie Klein. She lived on the corner lot. They had exchanged waves for years but never words. "Of course," he said after a pause, stepping back. She entered hesitantly, like she wasn't sure the floor wouldn't vanish beneath her. "I brought some peach cobbler," she said quietly. "Still warm." "Thank you," Milan said from the living room, watching with wary eyes. "I'm Margie," the woman said, setting the container on the counter. "I saw the video, and I need to say something." She took a deep breath. "I was the one who called the patrol company." Silence. "I saw someone at your gate from my kitchen window. It was getting dark. I didn't recognize you at first. You were wearing work clothes. I panicked." Lynn blinked. "I didn't think," Margie continued, "I didn't think it would become what it did." Milan stood now, arms crossed. "You called because he looked unfamiliar," she said slowly. "I wasn't thinking clearly," Margie said, eyes glistening. "Maybe I did react to what I saw. Maybe it was. I don't want to believe it was about race, but maybe somewhere in my mind. I assumed. I'm not proud of that." "I didn't ask you to come," Lynn said finally, voice flat, "but I appreciate that you did." Margie placed her hands on the counter, then turned and walked out, leaving the door gently ajar behind her. Lynn stood there for a long moment, shoulders rigid. Milan moved to his side. "You good?" "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "That's the second person in 24 hours who tried to explain away how they see me." He looked down at the cobbler, then turned away from it. Later that night, the video surpassed 500,000 views. The next morning, he retrieved the mail and found a thick envelope jammed sideways into the box. No return address. Just his name, handwritten in slanted black ink. Inside was a screenshot of the viral video, his image circled in red marker. At the bottom, scrawled in uneven letters, "Don't forget whose neighborhood this is." Lynn stood in the driveway, holding the paper in both hands, the gravel crunching under his boots. He didn't tear it. He didn't crumple it. He simply folded it once, cleanly, and walked inside. He laid it on the table. Milan, wiping down the counter, looked up. "What's that?" He didn't speak, just slid it to her. Her hand tightened on the cloth. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "You think this was from the patrol company?" "Could have been anyone," he said. "Could be someone on that HOA board. Could be a neighbor." "You think it was her, Margie?" He shook his head. "No." She was scared, nervous. This is bold. This isn't a mistake. This is a warning. They want you to feel watched. They want me to feel like I don't belong." And for the first time in years, Lin Wei realized that maybe they never thought he did. The folded note remained on the kitchen table long after Lin Wei had stepped away from it. It sat there like a contaminant, a quiet symbol of something rotten beneath the carefully trimmed lawns and clean sidewalks of Silver Oaks. Milan avoided looking at it whenever she passed, but she didn't throw it out. Lynn didn't either. They both knew that what it represented couldn't be dismissed so easily. It had become part of the house now, part of the space they had believed was theirs and theirs alone. That morning, Lynn walked through the house with a slowness that didn't come from fatigue. His movements were deliberate, thoughtful. He paused by the window in the upstairs hallway that overlooked the cul-de-sac, watching as neighbors watered plants or loaded their SUVs for school drop-off. No one looked up at the house, or if they did so quickly and without expression. He didn't know which was worse, being stared at or being avoided. In the days that followed, the silence around him grew dense. The video continued to circulate, replicated and re-edited with captions and overlays. Some praised his calm, others questioned what had really happened. There were those who speculated that it had been staged for attention, that maybe Lynn had provoked the police, that maybe it wasn't even his house. But the footage was too clear, too honest, too complete. It left little room for ambiguity. Still, the backlash came in waves, cautious, coded, but unmistakable. It was Xiaoling who first saw the flyer. It was shoved into their mailbox, folded between a coupon book and a local real estate ad. Printed in bold black letters on plain white paper, it accused Lynn of bringing shame to the neighborhood, of creating unnecessary drama, of chasing publicity. It had no name, no organization, no contact, just a single sentence beneath the accusations. This community was quiet before you made it a spectacle. Milan found a second copy 2 days later, tucked under the windshield wiper of her car in the hospital parking garage. That time she didn't hesitate. She stormed into HR and demanded to speak with someone, only to be told a complaint had already been filed by a patient's family member who said they recognized her from that viral race-baiting video. HR assured her the meeting was routine, but she returned home pale and furious. "I'm the one being reviewed," she told Lynn bitterly that evening. "Not the officers, not the person who left that note. Me." Lynn didn't answer at first. He was staring at the footage again, but not the original. This time, it was a clip from a community Facebook group where a man someone Lynn had once helped fix a porch railing for, free of charge, was speaking to the camera. "I've never had an issue with Lynn Way personally," the man said, shrugging, "but I think there's a right way to handle things. And going viral over it? That just divides the neighborhood. We all just want peace." Peace. That word rang in Lynn's head like a bell with a sour note. Everyone wanted peace, but only if it meant silence, only if it meant ignoring what needed to be seen. Then came the call from Xiaoling School. Millen took it, and Lynn heard her voice rise in confusion, then disbelief, then cold clarity. "She's fine," Millen said when she hung up, but someone slipped a note into her locker. Lynn felt a slow, creeping tension fill his chest. What kind of note? Nothing violent, just disgusting. Said you were a troublemaker. Said she should tell her loudmouth daddy to be careful where he parks next time. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. Xiaoling, when she came home, tried to play it down, but her red eyes betrayed her. Lynn pulled her into a hug and felt the way she trembled against his chest. "I don't want to move," she whispered, "but I don't feel safe here anymore." Later that night, he sat in the garage again, surrounded by the smell of wood and oil. The cedar planter box he had started weeks ago remained unfinished, the screws still scattered in a tray, the drill untouched. It had once been a simple project, a small act of peace. Now it felt like a metaphor, something that had begun with promise but was now paused mid-build, directionless. He picked up the drill, held it for a moment, then set it back down. The next morning, after his third cup of coffee, he opened his laptop and composed an email to the news station that had aired his first interview. He asked to speak again, this time on site in front of his crew, with his name and company banner behind him. He didn't want another neatly packaged living room segment. He wanted people to see him where he had built his life, on the ground with boots in the dirt. The response came quickly. A reporter named Carla agreed to meet him at a new site in development just north of town. When she arrived, Lynn was standing by the framework of what would become a single-story ranch home, surrounded by 4 of his workers. They wore hard hats and neon vests, their faces sunburnt and serious. Latino, black, white. Lynn didn't rehearse his words. He simply spoke. "I've worked in this city for 3 decades, he said, facing the camera. "I've poured foundations, raised beams, tiled roofs under a 100-degree sun. I've built homes for hundreds of families, my own included. But apparently for some people, none of that matters when they see me in work boots and brown skin." It wasn't a dramatic statement, but it was true. The segment aired that evening. It didn't go viral like the first. It wasn't clipped into TikToks or remixed on YouTube, but it sparked something quieter. Calls from churches, a letter from a city council member, an invitation to speak at Xiaoling School during an assembly on leadership and identity. Lynn hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected either the message that came the next day from a man named Jerome Vance, who ran a community outreach center. "We've got a youth carpentry program," Jerome wrote. "They could use a mentor, someone who's lived what you've lived. Think about it." He did. But as momentum gathered, so did resistance. A neighbor, Terrence McLean, one of the few black residents in the neighborhood, called to warn him. "There's a thread in the HOA Facebook group," Terrence said. "Some folks want to reinstate the patrol company. They're saying you overreacted, that you're making things worse." Lynn clenched his jaw. "Worse for who?" "You know how some of these people think," Terrence replied. "If they haven't seen a problem, it doesn't exist." "What do they want?" Lynn asked. "For me to be grateful?" "For you to be quiet," Terrence said. "Calm, compliant." Lynn hung up shortly after. Then he stood by the window again, watching the same streets, the same neighbors. He remembered the first time they'd driven through Silver Oaks as a family, still in the back seat of a realtor's car. Xiaoling had squealed at the size of the trees. Mei-Lin had gripped his hand tightly. It had felt like they'd made it. Now it felt like that dream had been built on a cracked foundation. That Sunday, Lin put on pressed slacks and a collared shirt. He didn't want to give anyone an excuse to shift the focus. The HOA meeting was held in a rec room behind the community clubhouse. About 24 residents sat on folding chairs, murmuring about pool hours and lawn maintenance. Greg Whitmore stood at the front behind a collapsible table, voice stiff with forced professionalism. When it came time for community concerns, Lin raised his hand. "I'm not here to argue," he said, standing slowly. "I'm here because I believe in this neighborhood. I moved here for the same reason you all did. Safety, beauty, community. But what happened to me was not just a mistake. It was a message." The room fell still. "When I wear a suit, people smile. When I wear boots and a flannel, I'm a suspect. That shouldn't be possible. Not here. Not in my own driveway." He scanned the crowd. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for honesty, for accountability. Because if we can't even admit how we see each other, we will never belong to the same place." He sat. Some clapped. Some didn't. But no one spoke. After the meeting, a few people approached him. One offered a handshake. Another simply nodded. Then a man he didn't recognize, mid-50s, work boots, tired eyes, stepped forward. "You don't remember me," the man said. "Name's Rick Holloman. We worked together once. Angleton. You were subcontracting. I was the foreman." Lin paused, trying to recall. "I treated you like crap," Rick said plainly. "Made you and your guys eat outside. Said it was policy. But it wasn't. It was fear. Stupid, ignorant fear." He looked at Lin fully. "I'm sorry, I should have seen you. Not just your face, but you." Lin didn't know what to say. He nodded once, and that was enough. Back home later that night, as he closed the garage door and looked again at the half-finished planter box, he understood what the next step had to be. Not just reaction, not just surviving, but building again. Not homes this time, but something harder. Trust, understanding, and truth. Even if he had to carve it plank by plank. The planter box was finished by dawn. Lin Wei had stayed up through the night, hands busy in the quiet garage, while the rest of the house slept above him. The cedar wood was smooth beneath his palms, each joint precise, each angle aligned without flaw. He lined it with fresh soil, packed tight and level, then carefully planted lavender and sage. The same plants Mei-Lin had once told him reminded her of her grandmother's garden in Hangzhou. He set the box on the edge of their porch before sunrise, right beneath the brass plaque with their family name etched in both English and Mandarin. It was a small thing, but it stood there like a declaration. When Mei-Lin saw it later that morning, she didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside it in her robe, arms crossed, eyes full. Xiaoling came down a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, backpack already slung over one shoulder. She stopped beside them, looked at the box, then nodded. No one spoke. There was nothing to explain. They all understood what it meant. That afternoon, Lin received a message from Delora Vines, the local activist he'd spoken to after the second news segment. She had found something, a complaint filed 2 years prior against Officer Delaney, the same officer who had ordered Lin to kneel. The situation had occurred in a different neighborhood, with a different man, but the pattern was nearly identical. A homeowner pulled over in front of his own house, asked to exit the vehicle, patted down without cause. The man had filed a complaint. It had disappeared into the system without follow-up. No charges. No record of action taken. Delora sent Lin the documentation and urged him to keep it. "These patterns matter," she said. "They add weight. They draw lines between dots most people don't want to connect." That evening, Lin forwarded the documents to his lawyer. Then he printed a copy for himself and added it to a growing folder on his desk labeled simply, "Proof." It wasn't for revenge. It was for structure, for truth that didn't rely on memory or witness, but could stand on its own. The next day, he called the news station again. He wanted to hold a press conference, not inside, not filtered. Just him, standing outside City Hall, with nothing to hide and no one speaking for him. Delora helped arrange the permits. The station agreed to send a small crew. Maylene stood by his side during the announcement, holding his hand. Xiaoling stayed further back, flanked by two friends, watching silently. Lin stepped up to the microphone beneath a cloudless sky, his shirt pressed, his voice steady. He spoke not of outrage but of patterns, not of vengeance but of consequence. He said the names of the officers, the name of the patrol company, the name of the HOA president. He said them plainly, without venom. He spoke of how easily silence becomes complicity, how easily perception becomes policy, how deeply damage can root when left unchecked. This isn't just about me, he said near the end. It's about how we treat people we don't recognize, how we decide, without speaking, who belongs. And it's about what happens when we stop pretending things are fine just because we're afraid of change. Some in the crowd clapped, others stood still, but they were listening now. That was all he could ask for. 2 weeks later, he stood in front of a high school auditorium in Perlin. A banner hung behind him that read, "Voices of Leadership, Building Integrity from the Ground Up." The irony wasn't lost on him. He wasn't used to speaking to students. He was more comfortable with tape measures than microphones, with load-bearing beams than abstract lessons. But the room was full, and their eyes were on him. He told them what had happened. He told them how he had once believed that hard work alone would shield him from suspicion, how he thought building a business, buying a house, raising a daughter in a clean neighborhood would be enough. But sometimes, he said, the walls you build with your hands don't protect you from the walls built inside someone else's mind. One student, tall, thin, with nervous eyes and a notebook clutched to his chest, raised a hand. "Do you think speaking out made it worse?" he asked. Would it have been easier to just let it go?" Lin didn't hesitate. Maybe it would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been right. Silence might keep you comfortable today, but it leaves the next person wide open tomorrow. He looked toward the back of the auditorium where Xiaoling sat with her mother, head high, eyes steady. "I didn't speak out to be a hero," he said. "I did it because my daughter lives in the world we shape. And if I let them treat me like a stranger in my own driveway, what message does that send her?" The applause came slowly, then gathered strength. Afterward, students approached him, some to shake his hand, others just to say thank you. One girl with braces told him her brother had gone through something similar in Sugarland. Another boy said his mother had always been too scared to speak up at work, but that he was going to show her Lin's interview. Later that afternoon, standing beside his truck, Maylene handed Xiaoling a bottle of water and turned to him with a quiet smile. "You did good," she said. "I was nervous," he admitted. "Kids are tougher than contractors." She laughed. Then her smile faded. "You know this isn't over, right?" "I know," he said, "but I'm not in it alone." That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Lin finally allowed himself to sit on the porch steps beside the planter box. The lavender swayed gently in the evening breeze. A few neighbors walked past on their way home. Some nodded. One man even paused to say the flowers looked nice. Lin nodded back. But this time, it wasn't out of politeness or habit. It was a choice. Because if they were going to see him, they would see all of him. The builder, the father, the man who stayed. 3 months later, Officer Rourke quietly resigned from the department. There was no press release, no official explanation, only a silent change in the staff directory. Officer Delaney was transferred to a desk role indefinitely, while the department reviewed its oversight policy. There was no public discipline, no apology, but there was movement. The private patrol company did not get reinstated. The HOA board elections were coming, and Lin's name had already been nominated. He hadn't accepted yet. He wasn't sure if he wanted to become part of a system that had once failed him. But maybe, he thought, the only way to fix a gate was to hold the key yourself. Maylene supported whatever decision he would make. Xiaoling, when asked, only said, "I think you'd be good at it. Just don't let them make you someone else." He didn't plan to, because Lin Wei had learned that safety wasn't given. It was claimed, defended, nurtured. And that silence, no matter how comfortable, never made things right. What you wear should not change how you are seen. Where you live should never determine how you are treated. And the man who built homes for others would now build something stronger, something rooted, something that could not be ignored. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice helps carry these stories further.